Hello, this is Brian Johnston. I thought it might be interesting to do a commentary on this video. I met up with Trevor Barstow probably in 1999, and he decided to take part in this experiment, this video experiment of undertaking a full body HIT style workout under the direction of Casey Viator. Casey was up for our conference in 2000. It was more or less like an IART meeting of sorts, and he did a seminar at the same time. But for this particular segment, he decided to take Trevor through a full body workout using Nautilus equipment.
We're doing a count of 3 up, 3 seconds up.
We are fortunate in North Bay to have a gym with the old Nautilus equipment, especially the combination machines, leg extension, leg press, pull over, pull down, chest fly, chest press, and the equipment was not exactly high end in that it was never maintained properly. A lot of grease was used for lubricant, and of course that collected all kinds of lint, hair, and just about anything else you can imagine. So the quality, the smoothness certainly was not there. A lot of chains in the machines, and a lot of friction or a lot of stiction as a result. I'm not sure what happened to these machines. I know that the club got rid of them. They replaced them with a lot of life fitness equipment. Too bad they did not maintain the machines, or at least change the machines to Kevlar belts. Here we see Trevor starting off the leg extension. I don't think the weight was quite heavy enough. It was a bit of experimentation in that regard. Trevor never used this equipment, so he more or less did warm-ups and guessed as to what he could do for an appropriate number of repetitions.
Flip right up next to the leg press. That was what was so convenient about the old Nautilus pieces.
Trevor's range of motion seemed to look fine on this machine. For some reason it feels a little differently. I found when I used this machine that leg extension felt ideal in terms of where your legs were positioned, and when you did the leg press, the legs didn't quite come back deep enough. I always liked a very deep stretch, whether doing leg presses or squats, and I never cared for the leg press in that regard, although the feel was quite exceptional. It had a very good feel, a constant tension throughout. An interesting side note is that Trevor is 100% natural. Some people thought he was on drugs or steroids. Perhaps he looks like that to some people. I just thought he had exceptional muscular development, and for the few years that he would come up and visit, he always looked the same. He didn't look any larger, he didn't look any more cut or defined, better muscle separation. He was very consistent in his appearance. Very good genetics in that regard. At the time of shooting this video, Casey was age 50, fairly good condition, but heavier than I expected him to be. I suppose I had a preconceived idea or notion of what he would look like, having seen photos of him back in the 70s and 80s. Nonetheless, he still looked fairly good, and I believe it was just prior to this video that he competed at the Master Mr. Olympia. From what I could tell, Casey did compete in that competition naturally. He just didn't have the fullness, hardness, separation, certainly not the definition that the other competitors did, and he did come across as having trained naturally for the competition.
I tell you, can you do another one? Come here. Good. Hold your breath. Great.
It was pretty close to this point in the workout that you could tell it wasn't so much that the weight was demanding enough. It was just that Trevor was breathing so darn hard and putting in so much effort that, in terms of the constant work, that his lungs and heart were giving out before his muscles were. So it would have been better probably to give a little bit of like a force negative on the repetitions, just to make it more challenging, so that he'd be down to 6 to 8 repetitions for the leg press as well as the leg extension. So here we have Trevor with about 170 pounds, give or take, on the squat. Certainly not a very heavy squat, but by the time he got there, his legs probably were fatigued enough, but once again I believe it was the result of his heart and lungs failing as opposed to his muscles failing.
Great. Perfect form. That's what we pass that. Good. The next movement is going to be the leg curl. And that actually gives him a little break. These first three movements are really tough. But he gets that metabolism and heart rate running. Come on now. 48 seconds. Great. How many more? Three? Try.
This is probably the point in the set that most people want to give up. This is where it gets very challenging, trying to knock off those last 2 or 3 repetitions in the squat. Your heart and lungs are hurting so much besides the muscles that you just want to give in. But this is really what makes the difference in making those final gains. Fortunately for Trevor, he now goes over to the leg curl, and if you check this out after those 3 sets, Trevor's heart rate is 181 beats per minute, and this really is an indication of how hard he was training. He was in his mid-30s at the time, and for someone in their mid-30s, 85% maximum heart rate is about 156 beats per minute. So here's Trevor already at 181, and he pretty much maintains that throughout. He does dip down a little bit lower to 170 some odd beats per minute, but it clearly indicates that he was being pushed so hard with so little rest that he was not truly getting in a very intense workout. The problem was more to do with his cardiovascular efficiency to be able to sustain the muscular work.
Everybody wants to rush through this stuff. We're taking a minute.
In that regard, I think this is one of the problems with the full body training. Maybe Casey wanted just to push him as hard as possible to demonstrate or make a point about how difficult such training is. But I certainly would have allowed Trevor to rest a bit in order to optimize his intensity of effort. After all, this high intensity training is about the intensity, how hard you can make the muscles work. And if your heart and lungs are failing, unable to meet the oxygen demands of the muscles, then the person certainly is not training with high intensity, but nauseating endurance more than intensity itself.
Give me 3 more. Next movement we're going to go into is the old Nautilus pull-on. You stick.
And then there's the issue of mental focus, concentration. Trevor, he's a great guy, and I'm not sure what he expected from this, but he became so overwhelmed, I think, mentally, that he couldn't quite focus on the task at hand. He's more concerned about the sweat on the bench than how much effort he's putting forth. Here we get over to the pullover station. He did have about a minute or 2 rest before getting here, but even still his pulse rate was so high, he was so exhausted just from the work that he completed for his legs, that he could barely breathe. You can't tell from this video because I shot in black and white, but his face was white. He almost looked like he was on the verge of death, as if the life was being sucked right out of him. And it's somewhat noticeable in the pullover, but very noticeable when he gets to the pull down. He's gasping for air so bad that he's doing pull downs with, I think it was like around 70-80 pounds. It was a very modest weight at best, and yet he struggled with it because he could not get the air in his lungs, but also the nutrients, the oxygen to the muscles. He just couldn't cope with any degree of intensity of effort.
Flex your abs when you come down. Make sure you breathe.
And so the set keeps going and going. It would have been much better for Casey to provide some kind of resistance to the machine arm, whether to give him more of like a force negative or something along those lines, just to get him to fatigue within about 6 to 8 reps. And he'll be doing his pullover very shortly, and when you see him do the the pull downs, once again Trevor's so exhausted that he can't even think about proper hand placement. He tries to grasp this very narrow bar with an overhand grip, and Casey has to tell him to use an underhand grip.
Come all the way back, put your feet on here and step out. I gotta drop the seat. Move on to this part here. Get the back step. So I just drop the seat, step back in.
So the seat was dropped to get a bit of an extra stretch, which is always a factor of this machine. You can't go super quick between exercises. There is a minor adjustment, and there's the hand placement. He gets positioned, and there's no way he can move that weight. As far as I'm concerned, he could have moved the weight if he would have focused hard enough, but his focus is not on the workout itself, it's just surviving it. And similar to the pullover, he's doing far too many repetitions. And one of the problems is that Casey's recommending around 3 seconds up, 3 down. Trevor is of the slower mindset that he wants to move around 5 seconds up, 5 down. So there's a bit of a conflict in terms of what Casey wanted in the workout, 10 to 12 repetitions, whereas Trevor was more or less aiming for 5 to 8 at the very most because of his slower cadence. And it's so obvious here that he's huffing and puffing so hard that he just can't do a very good workout. He's not getting very intense muscular contractions. He's going through the motions of trying to exercise hard. The pull down was at least 80 seconds of work, which was far too long. And coupled with the pullover, it was definitely too long. Each exercise should have lasted about 40, maybe 50 seconds each.
Okay, now we move to the double chest. All right. So you're doing pre-exhaustion also. You have to keep regulating.
This is one of my favorite Nautilus machines, although there's one problem. There's one weight stack for both exercises, the fly and the press. What seems to be appropriate for the fly for approximately 6 to 8 fairly slow quality reps, it's far too light for the chest press. So after the fly, you have to dismount the machine unless you have a training partner nearby. But dismount the machine, put the pin down another 3-4 plates, sometimes a bit more, in order to have a weight that's appropriate for, once again, another 6 to 8 slow quality reps. If you were to use the same weight as you do for the fly, then you're upward of 10, 12, 15 repetitions on the chest press, and you're getting into a tension time of at least 2 minutes, sometimes a bit longer. So that's the one problem with this machine, but other than that, it feels quite good. I like the angle of the fly machine, what Trevor's doing right now. There's a lot less tension on the rotator cuffs in this position. A lot of other fly machines are in an upright position, similar to the current MedX model. And if you happen to have sensitive shoulders or sore shoulders from rotator cuff injury of any type, you'll find it really kicks in. It's quite uncomfortable to perform. I really like the feel of this machine press. It's quite unlike a free weight bench press. With a bench press, you know when you've hit muscular fatigue. You simply can't move the weight up any further. With this machine, because of the nature of its force curve, you think you've reached muscular fatigue, but if you keep squeezing past that sticking point, usually you can knock off a couple of repetitions more than what you thought you could.
We make very few combination machines like this now, and you can really affect the high intensity with this because there's no movement. You just get in one and right in the other.
Now, the other thing to keep in mind in this full body routine is that there is no specific or direct work for the shoulders, side raises, overhead presses, bent laterals, or what have you.
30 seconds.
there's some work coming up for the arms, but no direct work for the calves, abdominals, low back, neck, forearms. So it indicates how grueling or demanding a full body routine can be if you're trying to hit all the muscles within one session. That's the reason why I prefer a split routine over a full body. Full body routine can have specialization built into it. For example, you could hit the arms with 4, 5, 6 sets and cut down the volume for the other muscle groups, maybe 1 set per major muscle. But still, I find it just too grueling trying to optimize the muscular effect, the feel, even the actual effect of the training, the hypertrophy from doing this type of training. The other thing that I question is the value of full body training, whether it's once a week, twice, or 3 times as in the older Nautilus days. If we were to exclude the steroid-using elite bodybuilders with incredible genetics that Arthur Jones trained, there are so few examples of people who have utilized full body training, and I'm talking about advanced trainees, to any good effect. So you take the average advanced trainee, say 10 years of training experience, not taking any drugs, how effective is full body training? I truly do not believe that enough volume can be implemented into a full body routine to produce an optimum effect. I've never seen any examples of it. And, there is a difference between maintaining whatever you've built up over the years and actually progressing beyond what you've achieved. And I just don't know of too many advanced trainees who have acquired what I would consider a higher end of their genetic potential through full body training. And I've known very few people who could sustain the rigors of full body training for several months, let alone years. Now, this here is an interesting exercise that Casey has Trevor doing. I'm surprised he didn't have him do the Tricep Extension, which is just around the corner with the bicep machine. He had him do dips instead. I'm not sure why. I never talked to him about it. Although I presume Casey realized how fatigued Trevor was getting, and there's no way that he was going to do any positive reps, so he had him do negative only. And at the same time, the negative only probably gave his heart and lungs a bit of a rest as well. He just had to pace himself through the negative.
We're going to go to the curl machine right here. That's all. This is supposed to be a torture. It's supposed to be creating endo, but you have
Now, Casey is saying that this is not supposed to be a torture session, but I don't think the workout was paced very well, not relative to Trevor's capacity, tolerance to this style of training. Trevor did do a few full body workouts in preparation for this video, but also he rested a lot longer. I suspect he trained just very hard because he is a hard trainer, but he certainly must have rested longer because this just blew him away. Now we're on to the Nautilus curl machine. This is one of the old plate-loaded style machine. One of my favorite. I actually haven't used it for years, but I really enjoyed using it when I did have access to it. And I think this becomes quite obvious, if it hasn't already, that Trevor's not even really working all that hard. He's just going through the motions. And you could see how his body's reacting, his breathing, and even his mind. He's, as far as I'm concerned, he's spaced out. And he's doing one repetition after the next. Eventually he does hit, I suppose, fatigue. It certainly doesn't look like he hit fatigue, at least muscular fatigue. It looks like he hits cardiovascular fatigue and more or less just giving up. This is my last exercise, and this is where I'm ending it. So we'll be seeing that very shortly. This machine, like many of the other Nautilus machines, incredible contraction. You have to fight for those final few inches. A lot of the more modern machines, I'm not sure about Nautilus, I haven't tried the latest Nautilus, but certainly MedX and others, the super slow machines, there's a fall off toward full contraction. So it more or less forces you to move a little bit slower toward contraction. Otherwise, you really don't work all that hard. The moment arm pretty much falls into place. So I don't really care for that type of tension. I'd rather fight through it, so that the point of contraction is the most difficult throughout the range. Just a preference, personal preference. Other people feel differently, and I think it has a lot to do with how you utilize the equipment and your manner or method of performance. Of course, if you perform in a super slow style and you slowly squeeze into that start position, there's nothing wrong with having a lot of load bearing at that point, and if you know how to flex a muscle and squeeze a muscle, there's nothing wrong with the fall off at the end. But you, once again, certainly are forced to move slow, at least slow enough to accommodate the machine. So we have an instance of you having to accommodate your training performance to match the machine as opposed to the other way around. I prefer the latter as opposed to the former.
Brand new to me. No question on that. I'm not driving home.
What I did not record in this video, it was shortly after what Trevor went through here. He sat on the steps of the gym and looking very pale, very white, and it was about maybe 15-20 steps down to another level, but he couldn't make it. He had no energy, didn't want to fall, and he sat there for probably a good 15-20 minutes, just resting and perhaps thinking back in terms of what he did do, what he would have done differently. Hard to say, but it was an enjoyable experience, and I hope you enjoyed the video as well. Thank you.